it was just all kind of crazy theories going about. I remember one when they had the shooting with Bountry that went down at this gas station over here in Compton on Atlantic and Alondra, somewhere in that area. I was supposed to be riding in the car with Bountry.
That was the theory.
The
people
theory
were claiming,
at that time. They even had simply because when Bountry got killed, he was driving a vehicle that was in Reggie Wright's name. That
your son.
My son. But it said Reggie Wright, didn't say Junior or Senior. It was in Reggie Wright's name. And quite frankly, Suge and Reggie at that point was kind of breaking up their relationship. And Reggie was trying to get that Tahoe back that Bountry was driving because it was in Reggie's name, not Death Row's name.
Right, even though it was like a death row vehicle.
It was a death row vehicle. I mean, Suge had paid for it and everything. Reggie just
People realize a lot of the cars that the death row gangsters and obviously artists as well were driving around were technically owned by death row.
Well, things like that was going on. But on that particular incident, shooting that day when Bountry got killed, allegedly, it was a passenger with Bountry. Bountry was out pumping the gas or something when this group who I'm familiar with was accused. I think they were arrested on it. I'm not even sure. But they was involved in it, you know.
You say a group, I mean, you don't have to name names.
A couple of guys from Piru. Well, one guy was a known hit shooter from, at that time, he used to work for Death Row, but he wasn't working with Death Row, but he was from Ludus. And then the other guy was from Fruitown. Pirus, they got after Bountry.
So one of them was in the car with him, you said?
No,
and someone else pulled
there
up?
was another guy in the car with Bountry when Bountry got shot. When they ran the vehicle, ran the plate, and it came back to Reginald Wright, they thought it was me in the car with Bountry for some reason. And I guess they were running with that theory for a minute. And all of a sudden they called the station to the captain and says, hey, apparently Lieutenant Wright, I was a lieutenant at the time working at Twin Towers on graveyard shift.
And Twin Towers is the jail
LA
in downtown
County
LA.
Sheriff,
Kind of,
yeah, LA County
so
Sheriff
far away
facility.
From Compton.
Yeah, but the whole thing is when the shooting went down and Bountry got shot, whoever that passenger was ran from the vehicle. And so when the police got there, when the sheriffs got there and started investigating the homicide, so a witness or somebody told them it was someone with that victim, and they ran from the vehicle. When they ran the plates and found out it was registered to Reginald Wright, that particular deputy or sergeant realized that my name was Reginald Wright and I was a lieutenant. Knowing that I knew those guys from the group, immediately assumed that was me who ran from the vehicle, called my captain, called a captain at the sheriff. He wasn't my director, Cecil Rambo. He was the captain at the time. And called Cecil and told him that apparently Reggie Wright was in this vehicle and he ran from the scene, it's registered to him, the whole thing.
So then the reason they're thinking that is because Buntry's name's Alton McDonald.
Right.
He's not the registered owner of the vehicle.
Right.
They were looking for somebody that ran off. It must be the guy that owns the car, must be the guy that ran away.
Yes, sir.
Else? That's
exactly.
a natural assumption.
And that being Reginald Wright, they didn't know about my son, Junie, at the time, the particular deputies on the scene. They thinking, oh, Reginald Wright, that's familiar. Lieutenant Reginald Wright. So that's must obviously or apparently it's him that ran. So they called the captain at the sheriff's station, Rambo, to tell him that they believe, or at least a vehicle registered in my name is at the scene of this homicide with Alton McDonald. They knew he was a Piru at the time. I guess they found out somehow. But anyhow, Cecil Rambo called me at home. He says, you okay? Good. He says, you own a Tahoe? I say, wait a minute. Hold on, what's going on? And that's when he told me it was a homicide at the scene. It was a victim at the scene, and the people there are trying to see if that's you, the vehicle registered to you. I said, no, see, that vehicle is registered to Reginald Wright Jr. It may not have Jr. on there, but I ain't been nowhere. I just got off of work. I'm gonna sleep. I'm in Chino Hills now.
Which is way out there.
Which is, way away from the scene. And he's calling me within an hour of the detectives starting their investigation. So anyway, he knows it. Cecil know me. So he, well, what about your son? I said, yeah. I said, there is a car. And I told him about the circumstances of the car being registered to Reggie Jr., but I'm pretty sure Reginald Wright is, I'm sure Junior, I call him Junior. I said, so Junior wasn't in that truck because they're not getting along. He's been trying to find Bountry to take the car back because he it shouldn't be in his name, you know. So anyway, long story short, he told me to call the sergeant at the scene. I called this lady. And then the minute she started interrogating me like I was the one. Mm-hmm. And I go, lady, you know, I've been at home sleep. You know, I worked graveyard shift. Well, who else could? Who's the vehicle registered? I said, my son, Reginald Wright Jr. She said, well, he could be the one who ran from this vehicle. I said, no, because him and Bountry at this time not getting along. I'm sure he wasn't with Bountry. I asked her, I said, what's the description of the guy that ran? And she said, oh, the usual. I go, lady, what? I said, what the hell is the usual? I asked the sergeant. I'm a lieutenant, so I wasn't intimidated by her. So she said, you know, he's about anywhere from 5'10" to 6 feet maybe, and about 180, 190. I said, yeah, that is the usual. But my son ain't the usual. I said he couldn't run from a scene. He's bigger than that, much bigger than. So I knew it wasn't.
How big was Reggie Jr. at that point?
He don't like me talking about that because I mentioned it before on thing. Oh, no. He wasn't no 5'10" to 6 feet, 175 pounds. He was in the 200s. Okay, I said my son couldn't have ran from there. So I knew it wasn't Reggie. I was convinced of that myself. You know, they started doing some document or whatever these are, podcasts or whatever, and saying that I was with him. I walked inside the little place to pay for the gas, and I was in there, and when I came out, the shooting was going down, and I refused to engage in the shooting. Well, I wouldn't have been scared to shoot at no goddamn body. I was trained to shoot in a situation that I need to. That wasn't me. I said, that's ridiculous, you know.
So what is the theory about why Bountry was killed?
It was something that had gone down where a guy had did some shooting or something. That's Buchanan. See, you got to remember, we're talking about stuff happened over 30 years ago.
It was related to V. Buchanan, who had been murdered.
Right.
So at this point, there was infighting starting to happen between the different Piru sets that were around death row over various deals that had nothing to do with death row.
Yeah, really. Some guys that used to work for a guy who used to work for Suge at death row. He had teamed up with some Fruitown guys that were big dope dealers and stuff. And this young man, Buchanan, who was a victimized, he was found in the middle of the street over by the cemetery off of Greenleaf Boulevard, and he was handcuffed. But at some point, the guys that were involved in it had filmed torturing Buchanan prior to dropping him off, just dumping him off over there by the cemetery on that street. And apparently they had a film of it, and they were at one day over Bountry's house looking at it. Some of the guys were looking at it, and that word got back to Buchanan's friends. And they allegedly was mad at Bountry, or wanted to get at Bountry for entertaining that, figuring he had something to do with it. So I guess they hunted him down for a while and caught him over there at the gas station. And that's when they shot him while he was pumping gas. I don't know if the sheriff department ever found out who was the guy that ran from the vehicle. I think the streets knew who it was and talked about it, but I don't even know how that situation. But I just mentioned all that to talk about some of the theories that Russell Poole used to come up with, because he ran with that as well.